A man fills 7,000 pages with answers to questions his century hasn't thought to ask, then locks them in a chest. Welcome to the science of the unexplained. I want to take you on a journey through the strangest silence in the history of human knowledge and what it cost the world. Milan, sometime around 1489. A man is dissecting a human skull by candlelight. Not a physician, a painter. He has obtained the skull through means he does not record, and he is doing something no artist before him has attempted. He is cutting cross-sections and drawing what he finds with the precision of someone who intends to understand, not merely to depict. On the page beside his drawing, in his characteristic mirror script, right to left, illegible to a casual glance, he writes a question about the location of the soul. He doesn't answer it. He moves on to the next cut. The skull drawings survive in the Royal Collection at Windsor. Nobody saw them for roughly 200 years. Leonardo da Vinci was born on April 15, 1452, in Anciano, near Vinci, in the Florentine Republic, the illegitimate son of a notary, Ser Piero, and a peasant woman named Caterina. Illegitimacy barred him from his father's profession and from the university system entirely. He received no formal Latin education, which in the 15th century meant no access to the canonical texts of natural philosophy. He later called himself an uomo senza lettera, a man without letters, in his notebooks, a phrase recorded in the Codex Atlanticus, now held at the Biblioteca Ambrosiana in Milan. And yet by 1482 he was in the employ of Ludovico Sforza, Duke of Milan, listed in a letter of self-introduction, whose authenticity has been analyzed by historians including Martin Kemp of Oxford, not primarily as a painter, but as a military engineer, architect and designer of weapons. The painting comes last on the list, almost as an afterthought. Here is the thing that doesn't add up. The man who would produce the most analyzed portrait in human history considered art a secondary credential. So what did he actually think he was doing? The notebooks are the answer and the problem. Over the course of his life, Leonardo filled an estimated 13,000 pages with drawings, calculations, anatomical studies, mechanical designs and observations. Roughly 7,000 survive, scattered across institutions in Milan, Windsor, Paris, Madrid and Seattle. The Codex Leicester, purchased by Bill Gates in 1994 for $30.8 million, the highest price ever paid for a manuscript at that time, contains Leonardo's extended investigation into the movement of water, the nature of fossils, and why the moon shines. He was working out in 1508 that fossils embedded in mountain rock were evidence that the sea had once covered the land. This directly contradicted the flood chronology that structured Christian natural philosophy. He did not publish it. He never published anything. Not a single page entered print during his lifetime. His anatomical work is the most startling case. Beginning around 1487 and continuing in sustained bursts until at least 1513, Leonardo conducted, according to his own notes, dissections of more than 30 human corpses in collaboration at various points with the anatomist Marcantonio della Torre at the University of Pavia, according to Giorgio Vasari's account in the 1568 edition of Lives of the Artists. Though Vasari's reliability on specific details is contested by modern scholars including Kemp, what Leonardo produced from these dissections were drawings of the cardiovascular system, the fetus in the womb, the structure of the spine, and the mechanics of the heart valve that would not be surpassed in anatomical illustration for a century. In the Windsor collection sheets dated to around 1513, he correctly described the way the aortic valve closes, a fluid dynamic mechanism that cardiologists in the 20th century would confirm using imaging technology. Researcher Morteza Gharib at Caltech published findings in 2000 in the Journal of the Royal Society, documenting that Leonardo's drawing of aortic valve vortices was, in fundamental terms, accurate. Leonardo had solved it. The drawings went into a chest, His assistant Francesco Melzi inherited the notebooks after Leonardo's death in Amboise, France, on May 2, 1519. Melzi guarded them. After Melzi's death, they were dispersed, sold piecemeal, lost, stolen, and partially destroyed. The anatomy papers did not become widely known to European scientists until the late 19th century, roughly 350 years after they were drawn. The question scholars have genuinely struggled with is not whether Leonardo was exceptional, that is not in serious dispute, but what category of mind he actually represents, and whether the isolation of his knowledge was accident or something closer to choice. Martin Kemp, Emeritus Professor of the History of Art at Oxford and the author of Leonardo da Vinci, The Marvelous Works of Nature and Man, 1981, has argued across decades of research that Leonardo operated within a coherent intellectual framework he called the science of painting, a project to understand nature's underlying structures so that they could be truthfully represented. For Kemp, Leonardo was not simply a polymath accumulating knowledge in separate domains. He was pursuing a unified theory of how natural forces, water, light, the body, obey repeated structural patterns. The notebooks were working documents for that project, not publications in waiting. But other historians push back on the tidiness of that interpretation. Paolo Galluzzi, director of the Museo Galileo in Florence and the editor of several critical editions of Leonardo's technical drawings, has emphasized in multiple catalogues, including the major 2006 exhibition Leonardo da Vinci, Engineer and Architect, that Leonardo's mechanical designs show a persistent gap between conception and execution. Galluzzi argues that many of Leonardo's most celebrated inventions, the aerial screw, the armored vehicle, the giant crossbow, were theoretical elaborations of existing military engineering traditions rather than original functional designs, and that treating them as anticipations of modern technology flattens the actual history of how those technologies were developed independently much later. The aortic valve finding sits at the center of this tension. Garib's 2000 paper in the Journal of the Royal Society Interface, the peer-reviewed publication where the findings appeared, confirmed that Leonardo's drawing of the vortices that close the valve matches what modern flow visualization technology shows. But Garib himself was careful to note that Leonardo did not articulate the complete hemodynamic mechanism in terms transferable to medical practice. He observed and drew accurately without building the theoretical scaffolding that would have made the observation actionable for subsequent physicians. What remains genuinely unresolved, whether Leonardo's secrecy, the mirror script, the absence of any publication effort, the retention of notebooks in personal custody, was deliberate concealment, a working method never intended to produce public output, or simply the unfinished state of a mind that moved faster than it could consolidate. Historian Fritjof Capra, in The Science of Leonardo, 2007, proposed that Leonardo was developing an early systems biology framework. Most historians of science treat this reading as anachronistic. The disagreement has not been settled. What changes from the beginning of this story to its end is the nature of the loss. At the start, Leonardo's isolation looks like an accident of history, a great mind born too early, his work scattered by misfortune. By the end, it looks more complicated. The notebooks were not suppressed by the church or seized by rivals. They sat in a chest, protected by a loyal assistant, and then dispersed into private hands because no institutional structure existed to recognize what they were. The knowledge was not destroyed. It was simply invisible, present in the archive, absent from the conversation. Morteza Garib could confirm the aortic valve drawing with 2000 imaging technology. Galileo, working a century after Leonardo's death, could not. The question that stays open is not whether Leonardo was a genius. That debate is long closed. The question is whether the history of science has other Leonardos, minds whose work sits correctly in some archive right now, in mirror script or its equivalent, waiting for the instrument that can finally read it. And the next mind we look at left something behind that took even longer to be understood and came out of a place where no one expected it at all.